Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way. We are celebrating Mother's Day, and in the light of that, I'd like to just think about some different things. But there's a lot of different types of movies that we have out. You have silent movies, you have talking movies. Obviously, most of us don't see silent anymore. There's action movies, there's drama movies, there's all kinds of different ratings on movies. There are many types of sermons that you have. You can have salvation sermons, or you can have fire and brimstone sermon. You can have prophecy sermons, teaching sermons. And today I'd like to do an interactive service since it's Mother's Day. We're going through some of the stuff. If you all want to open it up, anybody want to share something about their mom? It could be their literal mom, it could be a spiritual mom, someone who played a role in their life. And so I'd like to allow you to do that, because a lot of times you don't get that opportunity. So I wanted to open you with that. So with that in mind, let's just think about some characteristics, first of all, of some spiritual moms. Look over, if you would, to Romans chapter 16. Probably never thought of this before, or not often anyway. Romans, Paul is writing it, and it's right at the end, because he never had been to Rome, and so he starts to mention a lot of people's names. It's interesting when you look at the name that's mentioned, Romans 16 and verse 9, Romans 16:13. Notice what it says. It says, "Greet Rufus, a choice man in the Lord, also his mother and mine." How of you know the background? Who is Rufus's dad? Simon of Cyrene. If you remember, who was forced into action to carry the cross of Jesus. Notice then, obviously, the impact that their family had going to Passover, recognizing Jesus as the Passover lamb. But notice then what it says. We don't know how, but notice Paul says that his mother, and her name is never mentioned, but it's not only the mother of Rufus, but he said also my mother. Obviously, she had done some things motherly to help Paul along the way. And so I think notice it's a choice. A lot of them, I can see a lot of different spiritual moms. I remember we've had a number of times people on Mother's Day have talked about Shonda and Cleo and the things that they've done to help people out along the way. I know a lot of you have done foster parents. I know we've had that. A lot of that's foster. When you look at it, that's a lot of spiritual people that are out there doing it, whether it be Rosemary's done it. I know there's been others that have done it, Claudine, others. A lot of impact. You really don't know what the impact is going to be. But notice, one is that it's a choice when you want to do that. Another one is that it's a cost. If you look in the spiritually, if you look in Galatians 4, it's interesting what Paul had to say in Galatians 4, talking about being a spiritual. Notice in verse 19, Paul's writing to the church at Galatia. Thus he says, "My children, with whom I am again in labor until Christ is formed in you." Okay, so he's using the analogy of that of birth. He led them to Christ initially and go through the birth pains of going through that. And now they're getting caught up in a lot of potentially false doctrine. And he's saying, I'm willing to do it again. Going through labor again. How many ladies, how many of you want to go through it again? I've often heard that if the men had to do it, the population would greatly decrease and they'd never have more than one. But notice, I think it's interesting, the cost. He willfully chose to do that, to be that for them. You have the same thing when he writes that he's carrying. If you remember in 1 Thessalonians 2, he compares himself to a mother about giving the care morning, noon, and night, 365 days a year, all the time. And I think it's so important to recognize, but again, that was a choice. Paul did not charge for his services. Consequently, he had to work as on the side in order to do that, but he greatly cared for him and would do whatever he could for him. And I think it's important for that us to too. But you think about it, the spiritual moms, there's a choice that you all make. It's going to be a cost anytime you do it, but it's also that of caring. People really recognize the caring aspect. And I think also you, in 2 Timothy chapter 1 is an interesting statement that Paul also makes. And we'll look at it. 2 Timothy, then I'll open it up for anybody who wanted to share just a moment or two. Chapter 1 and verse 5. Notice what Paul writes to Timothy. He's about to die. And notice what he says. He said, I am mindful of the sincere, this is 2 Timothy 1 and verse 5. I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm sure that is in you as well. Notice nothing is being said about the fathers. It's obviously the spiritual character and things in the home came by way of grandmother and then also from the mother. And I think it's important. In other words, they were passing it on. And so often, so much of the care, of spiritual care, falls on the mother's shoulders, more so than it should, but it does. But you think about just the spiritual things that pass down, that happen. So I want to just think about it. Anybody have any things they want to say about spiritual moms that have helped you along the way? Or it could be your literal mom. Yes?
First of all, I want to say that I really miss our Wednesday night get-togethers because I feel like so many people some of the women that were in that group were all mentors to me, great mentors. I really feel like all the women in this church are a great leader for me spiritually, and I know that they're praying for me, and I always feel closer when that's happening, and I feel less close when I'm not using them as a whole mom.
Who else? Anybody?
I'll say it, Dan. Your wife, Miss Jean, although she was my high school teacher, she has become probably my biggest encouragement. She's my only fan I got. She likes me. Yeah, she encourages me. That I can be her child today. Happy Mother's Day to you. Thank you for all you do.
Among my first kids.
Yes, I was. You're right.
You really are.
I really was.
Yes, very much so.
Yes.
Marilyn was sharing with me this morning what her daughter is doing for kids that are not her children, and she should share this and not me.
Go ahead.
Well, our daughter has taken on coaching a Little Giants team, so to speak, and a few of them live in East Tulsa, and she has two of them in particular who lost their mother in the last year or so. We don't know exactly the date, but Dad works a way weird schedule, and one of the little 11-year-old boys, the other one is 8 or 9. I'm not sure, he's real little, but I don't know what his age is. But the older one calls her, hey, Coach Matt, can we come stay all night with you?
Yep.
And she went all the way out to East Tulsa, picked him up, brought him back to her house. She's got her pool open, giving him food, helping him out. He's called her through the week and said, hey, Coach Matt, how many pods do I put in the washer? You know, little things like that. Just, she's got a mama's heart.
And that's going to be remembered. It's going to be remembered. If I'm not mistaken, I think, Rosemary, you had someone come back years later, even that you fostered, come back to see. Sometimes you don't know if you're making a difference, but never think that you're not. Often, Gene and I have a friend who adopted a little one many, many years ago, and he chose to go not live by the word, and has been wandering for many, many, many years. And we got together 4 couples that we did last weekend, and Cindy was sharing that he's finally coming back to what they had taught and starting to turn his life around the way it should be. So never give up hope, because you never know. You never know. Who else? Anybody? Yes.
Cat Woods was a very strong spiritual mentor, and she had no hesitation to tell you if you were doing something wrong, no matter who you were, including our boss one day. So.
I think it's fun.
Yes.
I had a youth director, and his wife, when I was 13, just became a Christian. And my mom was not a believer at that time. And so her name's Kathy Beard. And they were in an accident where overnight her husband became a quadriplegic. And so he went from playing baseball and active until that. And so Kathy took us girls through 4 years of Bible study, just intense Bible study. We had to do homework and then went through that. And so she would answer questions like that were, she didn't have children, and she never did have children, but we consider her our spiritual mom, because there's 6 of us that she just made a tremendous impact on. And so when I could not ask a question, or if I asked a question to Mom and I'm like, that just doesn't sound right, she would never put my mom down, but she'd say, let's see what the Bible says. And it was just such a great role model that I consider her my spiritual mom.
That's great. By the way, when can you start being a spiritual mom? Yeah. Anytime. Anytime. And let's look at some characteristics also of of moms. We know the story well, but turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 1. We know the background is in verse 1 to verse 8. And the reason I bring it up too is I want you to recognize that every home just about will have problems to some degree. Hannah, who the main character is, definitely had trouble in the home. I've never understood why you would want to have 2 women being married to the same guy, or the other way around. Not just the rivalry and the problems. I'm thinking, why ask for that kind of difficulty? Whether you're having, you have it here, and obviously Hannah does not have children, although her husband prefers her, but the other one has had a number of children. And if you'll notice, in verse 6, it says her rival would provoke her bitterly. Basically, I have children, you don't, that kind of stuff. So this had been going on for a long time. And I want you to think, because so often I think we think that everyone is going well, but Hannah had difficulties in the home. And yet it doesn't mean that she couldn't become a good mom, which she later is going to be. But I think it's important to recognize there's problems. And you see what happens then. So she starts to pray. By the way, what does the word Hannah mean? Anybody know? Grace. Her rival, which you see her name there, what does her name actually mean? Quarrel or irritant? I think it kind of fits, don't you? That sounds great. It's kind of like Ruth. If you remember Ruth's husband, if you remember Naomi's 2 sons, their names were named Puny and Tiny. Wouldn't you love to have those? It's probably why they died early. But needless to say, so you find the problem, and obviously she goes to God then in prayer, because obviously she goes to the temple each year, and this has been going on for many years. And I think it's important for all of us, when there's problems, what should we do? Hannah had trouble in the home. She goes to the Lord in prayer. Same thing we need to do. Turn it over to the Lord, and obviously she's praying for some time, and you can see that Eli looks at her, who's the And he thinks that her lips are moving and she's not talking, and he thinks that she is drunk, and obviously he tells her to put away wine, and hey, I'm not drunk, I'm talking to the Lord. And notice it's interesting when you look at it, what Eli then says, go in peace, may the God of Israel grant you your petition that you've asked. In verse 17, notice in 18, notice the difference in her countenance. She said, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way, ate, her face was no longer sad. How is that possible? She's not with child yet. She turns her trouble over to the Lord. And Lord, I presented it, and I'm leaving it with you. How many of us turn it over to the Lord in prayer, and then what do? Take it right back. She turned it over to Him, and it's all, Lord, the only person who can correct this or change this is you, because without your help. It's interesting when you look on, and the Lord does open a room, and she'd also make some, you have the prayer, you also have a price. You notice what she says. She says then, if you look a little further down, she promised to dedicate him the rest of his life. Now you think about it, you've been praying for years and you want a son, and God now gives you a son. How many of us are going to keep the promise? Notice she gives it to him, and she brings him back to Eli, and she gives him to the Lord for his service. And obviously Samuel the son became one of the greatest leaders in Israel's history. But it did cost. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize, if you're going to be a man or a woman of God, there is a price. There is a price for keeping your word and doing what's right. It's interesting also when you think about the same thing happened with Mary. You think about Mary and the mother of Jesus. Did she pay a price? All her life, they always said illegitimate. Her entire life. Wasn't true. What about with your children? None of her children believed until after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. None of them believed. What about the price she had to pay when she saw him on the cross? What about the price she had to pay when she saw everybody rejecting what he was saying as a whole? You think about, there often when we look at it, and that's true for all of you as a parent, there is a price, and it does cost. But look at the end result. And that's what we got to keep in mind. The provision, when you get to chapter 2, notice I think how hard that would be. Every year that she comes back to the temple, her son is there. And notice what she does when you look at it. In verse 19 of chapter 2, Samuel was ministering to Eli, and in verse 19, his mother would make him a little robe and bring it to him year after year. Each year, she'd make him a new robe. Obviously, he's growing, and give him a robe. Each time, she'd go back and give him a robe. You notice in 21, God blessed her with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Nothing is ever said about them that God opened. And again, think about how much later in life, because her rivals had all these other children beforehand. But God blessed her. So I think about it. How many of us have continued to pray? How long did Abraham and Isaac, or Abraham and Sarah pray before they had a child? You think about how many years they prayed. They tried to answer some things on their own. Some issues only God can change. We need to let that. Listening doesn't necessarily mean solving. I think it's one of the hardest things. Guys, how many of us find trouble with this? Your wife talks to you. It's one of the things I admire about women. They all get together and they all talk about all these problems and do all this different stuff. And they go away and everybody's feeling good. And you talk to them. What solution do you have? Well, we just talked it out and kind of worked it out. And then the guy's doing what? How many times do we jump in and we try, instead of listening, we want to solve everything? And I'm getting better at it. I have to tell Jean, do you want me just to listen, or do you want me to try to solve it?
Just listen.
Seriously. She'll tell you. I actually ask her that question. And usually it's just listen. She's trying to work through it. But most of the time you and I are trying to come up with a solution. Well, we just need to open it up and speak, and then just listen. Well, we're thinking about that. What about some things that you have in your, perhaps a mother or a spiritual mom or actual mom who's been a prayer warrior in your life or paid a great price for you? Or the provisions they helped to provide for you? Anybody want to give a testimony on that? Yes.
This beautiful woman sitting right here is quite the prayer warrior, and not just my life, but yours also. Because for years, Danny and I went to doctors and exhausted ourselves trying to figure out why we couldn't have kids, why there were no children. We had lots of our first kids here as our students, of course. They were wonderful. But when we were greatly desiring to have a child of our own, the Lord had just said no. So for a number of years, it was very heartbreaking. And those of you who've been through that understand what I'm talking about. It's very, very heartbreaking. And my mom here is a very wise woman. And, you know, she never asked me a whole lot. But when it became quite evident that our hearts were sore, and her mother, our Grandma Jacobs, had talked to her about on the phone too, and said, well, we just need to pray. So I want you to know, Grandma Jacobs was praying, Mom was praying, and not too long after that, found out we were expecting, and it was Will, our first, and of course we have two beautiful daughters as well. And Mom means many things to me right here. She does. But when it comes to prayer, there's not many her equal, I'll tell you that. And I appreciate her and Dad, of course, so very, very much. And they've been such a joy and a blessing and a treasure to me. And I just love her very, very much.
Part of that also, what happened on that is, also my sister was a missionary in Peru. And in the South American countries, not having children is really, so they started praying. And I never forget my grandmother, my mom's mom, said, you'll have a child within a year. Yeah, right. So it wasn't our faith. It was the prayer and faith of other people. But anyway, you never know. It's why you have to really present it to people, because you don't know. You can always change. Also, I think it's interesting. Somebody else had raised their hand. I don't know who it was. Yes. Yes.
Well, my mother raised 10 children. They didn't have much money, but she knew how to manage money very well. And she was also a prayer warrior. Anytime anybody would come to her mind, she would pray for them. And sometimes during the night. And yes, all but one turned out wonderful, following the Lord.
Good. I think another choice that a godly mother does is that of preparation. But I think preparation, when does it start? You think about it, if you look in the, you don't have to turn to it, but in Luke chapter 1, you remember when the angel comes to Mary and says that you're going to be with child, and she's asking, how can this be? And then she says, do unto your servant as you wish. Then she then has what's often called the Magnificat or whatever, and she writes. Have you ever looked at what's in that? There's 15 direct Old Testament quotes. You're talking about a teenager. How does she know her Bible that well? So what happened, the reason I'm mentioning that is, are we preparing so we could be the spiritual leader if the Lord gives us children, or to be the spiritual leader, a spiritual mom for somebody else? It won't all of a sudden come overnight. We have to prepare ahead of time. And I think it's interesting when you look at it, the quotes that you have the same thing in Proverbs 31. If you remember, often people think it was Bathsheba writing to Solomon. We don't know exactly for sure, but she's making a vow, but then she then prepares him both in his private life and his public life as to what to do. How many times, and obviously she could see the mistakes that her, if it was Bathsheba, what her husband had made. Also, I think that of perseverance, another good quality. Mary persevered, didn't she? All the things that she went through. You think about it, others that persevered that went through it too. What about Elizabeth, her aunt? Well, we don't know if she was still living or not, but John the Baptist was killed. What about the mother of James and John? You know, follower of Jesus, and not very far into it, and John's beheaded. I think often we don't recognize the perseverance that they went through and continued even with the loss of so many loved ones. I think you have the protection and preparation. Isn't that what Jesus said? He wanted to gather Israel like a mother would her chicks, preparing and preparation. And you also have that of, I think it's, position or provision. People get upset with James and John's mother when she says to Jesus, will you put them on the right or the left? It's interesting what Jesus says. It's not for me to say. It's not for me to give. But she desires the best for him. And I think most of us as parents desire the best. And notice in the future kingdom, not in the present kingdom. So when you think about it, we can look at a lot of it. This, the protection. I see it every day, especially this time of year, and I'm at the refinery. How many of you know anything about killdeer? Okay. A lot of gravel out there, so you have killdeer, and where do they put their nest?
Right in the middle of it.
Right in the ground, right out in front, and you're walking. Well, you know you're getting close to the nest because they pretend like they're hurt with their wing, and they're going around trying to get you to chase them because they're wanting to pull you away from their nest. But they're there to protect. And same thing, we are here to protect those who are there. And so when you stop and think about it, are we thankful for the moms that we have? We can always learn. There's none that's perfect, but we can all learn from them. And we can learn to be more like them in the areas that we need to be more like them. And so, anybody else have something they'd like to say about their actual mom or their spiritual mom? Yes.
I do want to say something about my actual mom.
Okay.
You were talking earlier about a servant's heart. She has helped me so much throughout my entire life. Anything I need that I can't do on my own, she says, I'll come help you, or I'll come do it. She's always been.
Who else? Anybody? Well, don't forget to, yes, Jerry.
Well, as you know, my mother attended church here, so she afforded, help in the nursing home. She is a caring, giving person, and she helps support Sarah's kids. And growing up as kids, she was strict, but she was loving. She was a good mother. And she had a strict business side to her, and she had a humor side to her. One day she told me, if you look hard enough, you could go out for being negative about something every day.
Yeah. That's very true. You can look at the positive and what's going good, or you can look at what's going bad. Very true. And usually we look at what's going bad. Anybody else? Alrighty? Yes.
Let me leave you on a funny. My mother, when she was in the hospital with heart failure, about to pass away, I got two brothers. We were all there. We said, Mom said, of course she was loving the Lord. What kind of funeral do you want? And she said, I want to be cremated. And I said, Mom, I own the funeral home. You can have $1 million casket or whatever you want. She said, no, I want to be cremated. And I said, well, okay. My brother said, yeah, Mom, if that's what you want. So we cremated my mother, and I said, well, we'll bury her ashes up at Collinsville next to her mom and dad. She said, no, I want to be scattered in the wind. And I said, we all went, Mom, why scattered? And she said, that way no matter where you go, I'm always looking at you and your brother. So, Mom's looking. Well, they still care about you even after they've passed away or gone to the
Oh, I don't think I can top that one. So, Jerry, come on up. We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway. which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.